Welcome to Trial to Triumph, hosted by Caleb Johnson, the show about leaning into life's constant testing on your way to realizing your biggest blessings.
Welcome back, everyone. This is Caleb Johnson, host of From Trial to Triumph, and I'm very excited to have this man on the show today and just to share his amazing story with you all. So, Josh Cantwell, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Caleb. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's wild. I've been through a lot. I continue to grow. Been through some amazing things, and it's been wild. But some of the things I've been through are pretty chaotic. I'm a pancreatic cancer survivor. I've been an entrepreneur my whole life, so I've had some amazing up and downs. When it comes to business, I mean, we've had years we've been flush, making over $1 million a year of personal income, and I've had years where I've put $500,000 into my business because business was struggling. But I think most of my story really revolves around, back in 2011, I was a really successful real estate entrepreneur. We were flipping 100, 150 houses a year. We had a huge seminar business. We were doing probably 6 events a year. We were also founded a software company called RealFlow, and we had thousands of users. So we had 3 really successful businesses, an investing business, a seminar business, and a software business. My partner and I had grown the businesses so large, so fast that we decided to buy each other out. So we were just in the middle of this buyout. I was at work one day, and I came home from work, and I was 35 years old, healthy. I had a 2-year-old, a 1-year-old, and my wife was 8 months pregnant with my third. And I remember playing in roughhousing with my little girls, and I laid on the floor. I looked up at the ceiling fan, and I crossed my hands across my stomach. And I'll never forget feeling this giant lump on the left side of my stomach, out of nowhere. And just thinking like, oh, what's that? Like, that's weird. So I say to my wife, and she's over in the kitchen, I say, honey, come over here, take a look at this. She starts kind of poking around. It's hard as a rock. And I'm like, that's weird. Like, that's in a weird spot. It's kind of the left side of my abdomen, like next to my belly button. And I'm like, that's kind of like off to the left. It's not like anything I would expect. And so I went to my 3 aunts that are all nurses. I went to my buddy Latoul across the street. He was an orthopedic surgeon. And they're all like, you should probably go get a CT scan. Challenge was that my wife was 8 months pregnant. We were about to have our son. So I put it all off until he was born. He was born. He had a cyst in his neck. So he had to have surgery about 2 weeks after he was born to get the cyst taken out. And then I finally went in to get a CT scan, and that happened on a Friday. I'll never forget that on Monday morning, the doctor called me. The hospital called at 8:05. Like, you could tell they had just opened at 8 o'clock. And at 8:05, they called and said, hey, Josh, you have to come to the hospital right now. And I looked at my wife, Lisa, and I'm like, that can't be good. That can't be good. And so we went to the hospital. It was my daughter, who is now 15. I actually was just talking to her. She's home from school today because of a heat wave. She's home. She's 15. And it was her first day ever of preschool. And that was the day that I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. And so we've been through some amazing things in real estate and building businesses. I've been an entrepreneur for 25 years. Been through some major health scares. And today I just continue to praise the Lord for all the opportunities that I have, that I've been given, and continue to grow every single day, working towards, that day that I'll be called to follow my dad, my original kind of entrepreneurial mentor, and really, meet him again up in heaven. So it's been an amazing ride, Caleb. So it's there's a lot to unpack there and talk about, but we've been through a lot. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that and just being open and honest. I appreciate that, brother. And so you walk into the hospital, and I was on like a cliffhanger, man. So you go into the hospital, and what like, so I'm assuming they tell you that you have cancer. Like, how did that hit you right off the bat?
Yeah, so I remember being really pissed off because I went to the hospital on Thursday to get the CT scan, and I was like 20 minutes late. So they rescheduled me to Friday. Then I went Friday, I was 20 minutes late again. And I believe, if I remember right, they rescheduled me to Saturday. So I was like really upset and pissed off with the whole hospital system. And so when they called, I was already like kind of on edge, like stressed out. And like, come to the hospital right now. And I was like, oh crap, like that can't be good. So I went in, and I remember meeting with Dr. Smolak. So you can imagine I'm waiting in the waiting area. They call me back. I go in. Dr. Smolak, he knew. I could tell by his body language. I could tell he had something he was going to say to me that was significant. But he pulled up his computer, and he pulled up this image of my abdomen, CT scan, right? And he said, Josh, see this? This is your stomach over here. See this? This is your liver over here. Josh, see this big gray mass here in the middle? This isn't supposed to be here. And he's like, I'll never forget it. This is exactly how I said it. He said, this isn't supposed to be here. I'm sorry to tell you, Mr. Cantwell, but you have pancreatic cancer. And I just was like just getting totally punched in the face.
Wow.
With a brick. And I just kind of sat back in my chair. And then he said, I'm going to refer you upstairs to Dr. Ali on oncology, and I'd like to walk you up there. And that's when it really hit me. Like, this guy, this is so significant. How often would a doctor ever say, I'm going to walk you to your next appointment?
Yeah.
And so I'll never forget that. And then I sat in the waiting room for Dr. Ali, and Dr. Smolak is sitting next to me. And Dr. Ali is in oncology. So there's all these, I'll never forget, Caleb, there's all these older women in there, all white hair, probably in their 70s. And they're all waiting for, chemotherapy. And they're talking about their cancer. And I am now thinking like, this is like, I'm in another dimension. In the last 7 minutes, I went from thinking I was healthy to now I'm at the doctor. Now I have pancreatic cancer. And now I'm listening to these 75-year-old women talk about their cancer and talk about their chemo treatment. And Dr. Smolak is sitting next to me, and I'm thinking, my God, my wife. My mind turns to my wife and my kids. My wife is now dropping off. This is at 9 a.m. She's dropping off Juliana at her 3rd grade first day of preschool ever. And I'm like, my mom is at home with my other daughter. My son is still in the hospital, having recovered from his surgery. And now I'm thinking, they're going to grow up without me. That was one of the first things I thought about is my whole world in the last 10 minutes is completely different.
Wow.
I'll never forget how empty and how shallow and how insignificant I felt at that moment. Because I was convinced that, like, I knew pancreatic cancer wasn't good. Luciano Pavarotti had just died from it. Patrick Swayze had just died from it. Steve Jobs from Apple Computer had just died from it. And I'm thinking, like, there's no, like, my wife is going to be a single mom. It's just unbelievable. So that's what was going through my head, man. It was,
man, I can't
unreal.
even imagine. Like, in the way you explain that, like, I could see myself being in that environment. Like, just the way you explained it, like, the things that I would think about my family, like, well, I'm not going to be here, maybe in a year or 6 months, or you don't have any answers, so you're asking all these questions. And that's crazy. That's crazy, Josh. And so, Of course, after that, knowing your personality, you're a go-getter. And so I know you tackled it. You had to have tackled it. But how did you tackle it overcome it. I mean, you're here today, 10, 15 years later, praise God, healed. And so how did you tackle your business while battling cancer?
Great question. And the answer was I really couldn't. I made a huge mistake. And I think from an entrepreneurial perspective, this was probably the greatest lesson. I realized as a real estate entrepreneur and a real estate investor, I owned a real estate brokerage. We did private lending, we did fix and flips and wholesaling, and all of it was very transactional. Like you do a deal, you make money. I got into real estate because I had read Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and I studied different books and read books, and I read about passive cash flow. But I really didn't create any passive cash flow for the first 6 or 7 years of my real estate business. I fell in love with the quick money. And then when I got ripped away from my business, that year, I didn't work for about 9 months between the doctor's appointments, my son's doctor's appointments, physically not being able to work, having my surgery. And during my surgery, the doctor, Dr. Walsh, took out my stomach, my spleen, my entire stomach, most of my pancreas, a big chunk of my liver. He had to rebuild the arteries in the back of my liver. I had to relearn how to eat. I went from 235 pounds to 180 pounds in a month. I literally couldn't eat anything unless it was soft and like yogurt or popsicles. So between all the surgeries and all the follow-up appointments and physically not being able to get out of bed, I didn't really work for about 9 months. And so you realize now in business you made a huge mistake. You didn't have, and my employees tried to keep it together. They tried to keep doing deals. They tried to keep doing some of our webinars and software. But I realized so much of my business was based on me. I got to work. I pushed the boulder uphill. And my employees were right behind me helping me push the boulder. But if I wasn't there, like we didn't know which direction to push the boulder. And I realized I made a huge mistake. And so when I came back, I always knew that real estate investing was really about doing deals with other people's money and creating passive income. And so I decided when I finally got done recovering from this surgery, relearning how to eat, starting putting weight back on, I was going to focus on understanding the mechanics of raising capital, because I also knew that if I could buy assets with other people's money, I could create passive income and cash flow very, very quickly. And so I studied Securities and Exchange Commission. I studied real estate investing, syndications, commercial real estate, residential, everything to do with passive cash flow. And this second time around, Caleb, I was going to do it the right way. I was going to not focus on the current cash, the current hit, the current transaction, but I was going to focus on buying assets that would pay me forever in perpetuity. And so today, fast forward roughly 10 years, we own over 4,000 units of apartments. It's worth about $400 million. We have over $40 million a year flowing through our company in top line income. After debt service and payments out and expenses, there's millions of dollars a year left over for us and for our investors. And I got a second chance, and by the grace of God, I feel like I'm doing it the right way this second time around.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that, Josh. And I think it's so many times we can get in that, we can hear something like Rich Dad Poor Dad or a seminar or a coach, and we can hear the passive income, and we can just hear about these stories where they make $5,000 on one deal every month, and we want that because that means that we could, let's say, walk away from our job. And so we get into this habit, and then we learn wholesaling or a brokerage and real estate sales. And so, but then life happens, right? Something unforeseen happens, and it's happened in my family where you don't have money coming in. And so what do? You're screwed. I mean, unless you have a big enough nest egg, or you do have something residual coming in. That's why it's so important to, I think, take an audit of yourself, of your business, and your time where you are, and then ask yourself, okay, is this where I want to be in 5 years? And if it's not, what do we need to change to actually get there?
Yeah, no question. I think you look at entrepreneurs like what Steve Jobs did at Apple Computer, completely blowing up the old Macintosh computers and rebuilding it into the iMac that relaunched that business. You look at what Elon Musk has done with Twitter and completely rebranding it, getting rid of 75% of the employees. You look at what Dana White did with the UFC, taking the original version of the UFC and making it into the version of the UFC it is today. Most people take that audit, Caleb, and do it out of pure survival. Like they do it because they have to. Mine was also the same circumstance. Like I had to make a change. I did not want to go back to the way I was doing business. So the tougher thing for entrepreneurs is being real honest with yourself if you're in the middle of a successful business that really isn't going the direction that you want, or you're making an investment in real estate or an investment in an e-commerce business or whatever. I've done all of these things and it's not going the way you want, is having the guts to be honest, take that audit, and then actually make the change when the change isn't really necessary in that moment. But it is necessary for the long-term growth of the business and the long-term success of you and your company and the long-term fulfillment of you and your personal mission. Most people do it because they're in a circumstance like I was in. Like Apple Computer was broke. Twitter was going way off into these very progressive, liberal directions that wasn't really honest news media. So you do these, you see these things happening, and it often comes out of like an addict, like a drug addict. You're like, they have to hit rock bottom in order to make a change. Like, let's not do that in business, right? Like, let's not do that. Let's not hit rock bottom, and let's actually make the changes proactively. That's what I've learned going through this process in my own life.
Yeah, spot on, Josh. So what were some things that you actually did, some tangible things that you did that kind of got you to that point where, besides cancer, right, but actually helped you tangibly shift your business to be more passive, to generate more of that passive income compared to just a transactional business?
Look, man, I think there's a couple things. I have a really close friend of mine who's one of my business partners now, who told me years ago on Wall Street, the large Fortune 500 companies, the business is actually valued higher from an EBITDA perspective or a net free cash flow perspective. It's actually valued at a higher multiple the longer that their continuity contracts are in place. So I thought, well, if I have a contract, like a purchase agreement for real estate, and I buy a house and I flip it, sell it, it's only worth the income I make today. If I buy an asset that's a rental property or an apartment building, which is what we focus on now, and I buy that and I have contracts in place for laundry or for parking or for leases, and those are at least a year or maybe longer, then I'm actually going to get a higher valuation of the overall business because somebody wants to buy the cash flow. So I had to convince myself, Caleb, that I needed to not be focused on the dopamine hit of having this larger transaction today, which is usually a flip. You flip a business, you flip a building, you flip a piece of real estate, you may make more money today. But if you take the long-term approach, it's actually worth far less long-term. And so that was one of the things, is him telling me that and me being convinced that owning the asset, owning the continuity contracts long-term, the business would be worth more. And they are. I've got buildings. I just had a call with my broker, Caleb, before we started. I told you I was a couple minutes late for this because of it. But I've got a deal that we bought. We're all into it for $13.5 million. And today, it's worth about $18.5 million. So if we sell it, which we're actually contemplating selling it in Q1 of next year, we'll walk away with $5 million. Well, if I had bought that building back when I bought it 3 or 4 years ago and just flipped it, I probably could have made $500,000, right? 3 years ago. But because we focused on creating cash flow and the long-term contracts values it more, we're going to make $5 million. And that's only one of 15 buildings we own. And so that's a big deal. That epiphany to me, being taught that lesson, was a big deal. Secondly was I believe, Caleb, that funding equals freedom. And I don't think enough investors and enough business owners, e-commerce owners, digital marketers realize that getting the funding for your business and really understanding how to work with investors, equity investors, limited partners is so critical. So many guys are trying to do deals, trying to be transactional, trying to buy rental properties, flips, apartment buildings, but they put raising capital and understanding the capital stack at the bottom of the priority list. For me, I put it at the top of the priority list all the way back in 2012 when I survived cancer. And I knew if I had access to other people's money, I could buy any asset I wanted anytime of any size. And we've done that. I've done a 730 unit apartment building that was worth $50 million. I did a $100 million apartment complex, which we own in Houston. We were able to raise $5, $10, $20 million pretty easily. And so we control the market because of that. And we can control what assets we buy and being a bigger player. I think a lot of people are buying assets and they're just worried about today. So to me, it became cash flow long-term and how do I position myself to buy assets with investors where basically treating that person like a partner. Like I was going to take care of their money as if it was my own. And I was going to position the asset to protect everybody's money. Those two things, when I went through that kind of audit that you talked about, cash flow long-term, not today, and investor relationships changed everything for us. And I think so many people are just so worried about how do I make money today? How do I make money today? And they stack a chip or a brick and then they sell the brick instead of stacking a brick and then another brick and then another brick and then another brick and actually building something of significance.
I love that, Josh. And I haven't actually heard of that where if you have an apartment building, someone's buying the contract and that's what they actually want, right? Because the valuation increases. So like if we have a laundry contract, well, whenever we buy an apartment complex, we actually look at that almost as a negative whenever I buy it, which I think has been wrong because, okay, how long do we have until we can get out of that? Because we might be able to make money going with another company or going another route. But how you explained it, which is completely true, is if you have a contract and leases too, tenant leases are the same exact thing, right? Someone's buying those contracts technically in the dirt and the building and all the asset and all that, but the income, right? The valuation of the property is what's important. And so if you can force appreciation, which is what we talk about all the time in commercial real estate, which you can do in residential, but ultimately the value of the property in residential is just depicted upon comps, right? What your neighbor's house sold for. So if you can increase the value, well, to increase the value of a commercial property, you need to raise that income. And you've obviously done that very well. So that's great.
No doubt.
And now, Josh, pivoting a little bit, I love talking real estate, man. I could talk about that for days. Now, your family obviously is very important to you. And so during this time, what has family meant to you with growing your businesses and just for your own growth?
Yeah, look, man, I think one of the things that I think that came out of the surgery related to my family that was so important was my father said to me during the surgery, he said, son, he said, look, if you're lucky enough to get through this, and at the time, pancreatic cancer had a 7% survival rate. Now it's 11%. He said, if you're lucky enough to get through this, you have to listen to the lessons that you're learning along the way. What lessons is God trying to teach you along the way? So don't just get through it. Like, this is a journey. Like, what are you going to learn along the way? And then about 6 months after I survived, my dad said something else that was, I think, profound to me. He said, son, son, you were spared for a reason. And in the second half of your life, which you shouldn't even have the second half of your life because 93 people out of 100 don't get the second chance now that you're going to have. When I was officially given the cancer-free, the surgeon, saved my life on the operating table and got all the cancer out. And 6 months later, they said he wasn't going to come back. He said, son, you were spared for a reason. And I thought to myself, I said, there's something here that I didn't think. And he said, you have so much talent, you have so much ability. Your job in the second half of your life is to maximize that talent, that ability. And so, I went to my wife and my kids and I said, look, I'm going to take more risk than ever. And one of the things I think that really stood out to me was when I went back to meet with Dr. Ali, about 6 weeks after the surgery, Caleb, and I went back to meet with Dr. Ali, and I was still fighting through the recovery, but all the scans were coming back clean and all that kind of stuff. I remember walking into Dr. Ali's office, and Dr. Ali, who had originally diagnosed me with cancer, the oncologist, he didn't know exactly what happened with my surgery. He said, I walked into his office, he said, Josh, let me read this report of your surgery. And he started reading it, and I kind of watched as his mouth sort of dropped open in front of his computer. And he looked over at me, I'll never forget, he turned and looked at me and he said, this is exactly why I sent you to Dr. Walsh. Dr. Walsh is a daring surgeon. And I said, what do you mean he's a daring surgeon? And he said, Josh, he's like reading this report. He's like, you're on the operating table for 10 hours. Dr. Walsh did things during the surgery that there's no playbook for this. To give you an idea, Caleb, on the operating table, they put 21 units of blood in my body. Well, as you and I sit here recording right now, we have 7 units of blood in our entire body. So they cycled the blood through my body 3 times through in that 10 hours. I have everybody else's blood in my body except my own. Think about that.
Wow.
And Dr. Ali says, Dr. Walsh is a daring surgeon. He said, Josh, 95% of surgeons would have opened you up, saw how complicated it was, saw how it was wrapped up in all your other organs and how he was going to have to recreate, literally take veins out of your leg and implant them into the back of your liver, take this huge cancer mass out of your abdomen. It was as big as a basketball. And he said 95% of surgeons would have never tried that surgery, Josh. They would have opened you up. They would have seen how complicated it was. They would have sewn you up and sent you home and said, there's nothing we can do. And so I looked at Dr. Ali and I said, so you're telling me the only reason why I'm alive right now is because Dr. Walsh was daring and willing to try things and do things that no other surgeon would try. And he said, absolutely, that's exactly right. And so when I think now in the second half of my life about my family or about business, those 2 words, be daring, and my father's words of, you were spared, what's the reasons in the second half of your life? And so when I was much younger, Caleb, like a lot of younger people, young entrepreneur, high school, college, like we care so much about what people think about us and the approval that we get from other maybe girlfriends or friends or parents. And so in the second half of my life, I've completely stopped caring about what other people think. Truly stopped caring. And I care only about what my mom and my wife and my kids think. Because my mom is an extension of my dad. My dad passed away about 3 years ago from Parkinson's. And I care so much only about their opinion. And so I share with them my vision of what I want to create with our lives, whether it comes to our religious faith, when it comes to our business as an entrepreneur, when it comes to being a great father, as a great husband. And I ask them for feedback. And I say, this is what I think I should be doing. What do you think? I think this is what I should be doing as a husband. My wife, Lisa, am I on track with this? To my kids, 15, 14, and 12 years old. This is what I want for you. This is what I want for you as a father. Am I on track for this? What do you think about that? And my mom. And that's allowed me to have their approval, which is the only approval I care about. And this comment of be daring, be daring. I didn't know, right, when I bought my first apartment building that was a 730 unit, I didn't know everything about apartment investing. When I bought this last 296 unit, I didn't know what it was like to just buy and operate a $25 million asset. When we spent last year $8 million on CapEx and we turned 600 units in our construction company, I didn't know. I'd never done that before. And most people, they're so concerned about failure. They're so concerned that they're never daring. And there's so much on the other side of daring. There's so many successes, wins, exciting stories, funny things that happen. There's so much on the other side of daring that you don't know. You have to be willing to be daring when you think to yourself, like, oh my God, I could never do this. But think about it. If Dr. Walsh wasn't daring, I wouldn't be here. And so I feel like I owe it to my dad, my surgeon, and I owe it to God. I owe it to Jesus Christ as my Savior to be daring every way I can. Like to absolutely push the envelope. Whether it's with my family and building a new house, going on crazy vacations, whether it's taking time to take my kids to school every day, pick them up from school, coach all their sports, whether it's staying up late at night working when everybody else is sleeping. It's doing things completely different than what the average entrepreneur and the average W-2 employee is doing. To always be uncomfortable. Those are the lessons, the family lessons, the entrepreneurial lessons. I think that those two comments, that those two words, be daring, 11 years later, I think about that comment every single day.
Wow. I think we all need to be more daring. And Josh, thank you so much for sharing all that. I mean, and thank you for being here. Thank you for your time. I know you're a busy guy. We have to start wrapping up. Unfortunately, I think we could talk for a lot longer. But Josh, the first question that I'm going to ask you, the final three, the first one is if you can have a book recommendation for our listeners, what would that be?
Really, one of my favorite books of all time is Extreme Ownership by Jocko Willink. I'm sure a lot of people have recommended that. It's my favorite book because if you're a CEO, you're a leader, you absolutely have to own every decision. You have to empower other people to work with you, under you, on your team. But at the end of the day, it's 100% up to you. The second book is Who Not How by Dan Sullivan. I've been following Dan Sullivan from Strategic Coach since I was 22 years old. I'm 47 now. And now in business, we have, over 100 property managers, employees, maintenance techs, contractors, and then all of their families, and then all of our residents. We have over 8,000 people that live on our campuses every day. And as a business owner, as a CEO, the question I ask myself now is, who is the expert? Who can do that for us? And I literally learned that and was empowered to ask that question by that book, Who Not How, by Dan Sullivan. You have to get to the point where it's not, hey, I'll take care of that. I'll do that. Let me handle that. It's who do I know who's an expert in that area and bring them in, especially when you're at scale like we are. So those are the two books I would recommend, right? Extreme Ownership and Who Not How.
And Josh, if people want to learn more about you, where's the best place that they can do that at?
Yeah, our main website, freelandventures.com, freelandventures.com/passive. Everything is there. Our portfolio is there. Links to our YouTube group is there. Links to our Facebook group, our podcast. So freelandventures.com is our main website.
And Josh, the final question is if you can share one final thing with our listeners that they can take away from today's show, what would that be?
Honestly, Caleb, it's probably the two things I already mentioned. It's funding equals freedom and be daring, right? Funding equals freedom. If you're a business owner of any kind, focus on investors. Your capital stack is critical to the long-term health of your business, and be daring. I mean, I can't imagine now over the last 11 years all the things that we've been able to accomplish that really push the envelope because of that two words that Dr. Ali said about Dr. Walsh. And I think all of us can be daring, but be in control, under control. You can make daring decisions, but still be under control and not take extreme amount of risk, but be daring, and also insulate yourself, protect yourself by knowing what your downside is, what your risks are, and then be daring. Take that next step, buy that next business, go ask that girl across from the bar or the restaurant for her phone number, do all the things that you maybe wouldn't have done before, because all the fun and excitement of life is on the other side of being daring.
I love that. Josh, thank you so much again for tuning in and being here. And to the listeners that are listening now, we're going to sign off now, but we appreciate your time, and we'll catch you next time. Bye.
It's time to grab your victory. Find us on the web at redseacapitalgroup.com and follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Red Sea Capital Group.